right. Welcome back to another episode of the Always Adaptive podcast. I am your host, and this is episode number four. My name is Randall James, and I have a lot of stuff I want to talk about. But before we get into that, I just wanted to take a quick moment and say thank you. I'm extremely appreciative for all the support that I've gotten, not just people watching and listening, but the people that have been commenting and liking and sharing it around. I really do appreciate that. I think people underestimate just how unforgiving the algorithm is these days on all of social media. And so regardless of whether you watch or listen to something all the way through, that watch time doesn't really matter if you don't engage with the post. So like people think that they're being fed a stream of content that's in chronological order, and it's not. It's based off of how much engagement each thing gets. So if you watch something, but you don't engage with it, you don't like it, you don't comment, don't do anything, regardless of how you feel about it, the algorithm will think to itself, this is a bad piece of content, and it'll get buried just like that, and it'll stop showing it to anyone, which is unfortunate, but that's just the day that we live in today. So I really do appreciate it. And be honest with me about any of this stuff. If you don't think it was a 5-star podcast, don't give it 5 stars, give it 3 stars. Tell me why. What do you think could be improved upon? I'm open to feedback, and I'm always looking to improve. You might be able to tell this is a higher quality camera. So each time I'm trying to find things that I can improve, whether it's lighting, whether it's camera quality, audio quality, whatever. So thanks again. And with that being said, on to the topics of today's podcast. I want to talk about, there's a really interesting podcast that I listened to with Zach Telander and Greg Doucette. These are both very prominent people in the fitness industry. Zach Telander is an Olympic weightlifting coach, super strong guy, and he's well known for having that strength despite not really looking the part. It's not like he looks unfit, but he just doesn't really have that conventional fitness look. And Greg Doucette is an amazing fitness influencer online who doesn't just focus on the muscle and the strength and all that stuff, but he also focuses on cardio. He's a very big advocate for cardio, which me, as am I. I think, it's cool having the strength and the muscle and stuff, but ultimately, if you have poor cardio, that is going to affect your health outcomes. But so in that video, they're talking about sort of the state of the fitness industry. And of course, they touch on steroids, which if you've been following me for any amount of time, that's a big thing to me. I harp on it all the time, not just because I think it makes you, I think it makes you untruthful and in a lot of ways a fraud. But I also think it's not healthy. I think being on steroids is very similar to being overweight or being obese. And they touch on that in this video. So we'll get into that. I want to talk about the longevity space, and specifically Dr. David Sinclair, who has been at the forefront of this space for a really long time. Any who's who podcaster that talks about health or anything, chances are he's been on that podcast. I mean, Peter Attia is one of the largest health podcasts out there, and Sinclair has been on there. But there's been some trouble around that space, and in particular around David Sinclair, where there's been some people want to play fast and loose with this phrase, but fraudulent data that hasn't been able to be replicated. It's kind of sketchy. So we'll talk about that. I want to talk about a Washington Post article talking about standing desks, which I'm using a standing desk right now, and how they may not be healthy. I have my thoughts on that. It's sort of silly. I want to talk about a CBS News article talking about wrist weights on the arms and how people could be straining their arms. It's kind of a silly story. And then I want to talk about, which will sort of have to do with some of these other stories, I want to talk about supplements like creatine and stuff. But before we begin, just want to shout out my social media. I hope you'll follow me at Always Adaptive on Instagram, TikTok, Threads, and X. And if you ever have any questions about anything, you want me to expand further on anything, or you're curious about anything, you can always email me, randall@alwaysadaptive.com. And my website is alwaysadaptive.com. And if you like the podcast, leave a like, leave a review, anything you want to do with it, just engage with it. And I really appreciate that. So with all that out of the way, finally, sorry for blabbing, we're going to start off with this Zach Telander and Greg Doucette video. So I'm going to play a clip from this video, and then we'll discuss it on the other side.
We're guilty of it. I'm guilty of it. It's just levels. You know what I mean? Yeah, I mean, and I think to define fitness, like what's happening in the fitness industry is fitness influencers don't promote fitness. They promote the appearance or the illusion of what being fit is. And so the Liver King that you just described, he looked really fit. I mean, look at the abs and look at the muscles and how strong he looks super fit, but yet he's not.
He was
C-Bum
he was
looks
very
fit.
unhealthy. Yeah.
C-Bum's not fit. He has no energy. He has brain fog. Sam Sulik's not fit. They're on these bulk and cut chocolate milk diets. These are not fit people. And when I was an IFBB pro competing and looked enormous, I wasn't fit, but I'm fit now. And so
Yeah.
the difference is,
well, so how do we resolve this?
well, I think there's some guys that promote fitness very well. For example, Will Tennyson and Jesse James. I think these guys are promoting fitness the right way, being natural. As soon as you add the word on steroids and fitness, it doesn't go together. As soon as you're on steroids, steroids and obesity are on par. If you take me, a guy who's obese and a guy who's on steroids, and you give me their blood work, they're probably about equal. And so anyone who's on steroids, fat shaming somebody who's fat, you're doing just as bad to your body as a person who's fat. If you took 100 people who are overweight and 100 bodybuilders and you say, who's going to live longer? Probably the same.
Wow. So I love that they're talking about that. You know, steroids and obesity are on par, and not even just steroids, but being over musculature or having an excessive amount of musculature, that can be just as problematic as having an excessive amount of fat on your body. You're stressing your heart out. I mean, this is why bigger dogs die faster than smaller dogs, right? Like, you could have a bunch of muscle on your frame and be lean, by the way, 8% body fat, but ultimately, if you're 50 pounds overweight, that is not going to be a good thing. And I think, what they're talking about there is a discrepancy between what people are seeing online, the people that are quote unquote fit, and what actually is fit and what is healthy. Like, I think that's the key point there. And I'm constantly talking about, I view fitness through the lens of health, not just aesthetics or strength or performance or anything. I think those are all good things. You can have some of that stuff, but ultimately none of it matters if you don't have your health. To me, fitness includes like physical, mental, spiritual, and sexual. Like, fitness originally was defined as the state or quality of being suitable or fit for reproduction. And then, oh, by the way, now you have to protect your mate. You have to protect your family. That's important, and that requires strength, and it requires speed. It requires aerobic capacity. I mean, just as an example, like, if you miss your flight because you couldn't run a half a mile, like, that's not really that long of a distance. But we've all been in situations where we're running against the clock, we running late for whatever reason, and we're having to rush. And, someone could easily, if someone's running down the terminal trying to make it to their flight, if they don't have good cardiorespiratory fitness, they could easily have a heart attack right there on the terminal floor. And so I think it's a bigger deal than people make it. And it's a frustrating thing because I only see it getting worse, especially with the proliferation of content creators being open about their steroid use. Now, I do think that is a good thing, that transparency, but ultimately it's also at the same time saying that, hey, it's okay to be on steroids as long as you're open about it. And I just don't think that's the truth. I think the only time that you should really be on something is testosterone replacement therapy if your testosterone is actually low. And, oh, by the way, you've actually taken steps to make sure that you've tried to raise your testosterone naturally. Now, if you're a 60, 70-year-old man and your testosterone is plummeted, chances are, yeah, you probably need some testosterone replacement therapy. But if you're 30 years old and you have low testosterone, okay, let's take a look at how much sunshine are you getting, vitamin D, what does your fat intake look like? Fat is extremely important for hormone production, and like, how many grams of fat, what kind of fat are you intaking? How much are you moving? Exercise. There's studies out there that show that squats and deadlifts can increase your testosterone by an enormous amount. How much outdoor time, just in general, just fresh air and hydration, and there's so many different things, supplementation, fish oil, eggs. What have you done naturally to try and improve your testosterone production? And if the answer is nothing, then you should be talking about that first before you're even thinking about testosterone replacement therapy. But I think, moving on from that, I don't want to harp on the steroid thing too much because I do talk about it a lot and it's frustrating. But the other part of this is like the strength and speed component of fitness. And another thing that I like to harp on a little bit is the healthy at any size movement. And a video came across my feed of a woman who had gotten out of her car and she had a baby in a stroller. And she's, I wouldn't say, I think she's pretty close to obese. She's not quite there, but she's pretty overweight. And she falls and her stroller, her baby stroller, starts to roll away into traffic. Now, you may have seen this video. It went viral for a long time. And it just recently came back across my feed. So I wanted to talk about it because it really pissed me off. But she falls and holy crap, it takes her a really long time to get up. And meanwhile, the stroller is just rolling forward right into oncoming traffic. And thank God there was a man there that came over and stopped the stroller. But I'm just going to play this video for you so you can get a sense of what I'm talking about.
Window too, man.
Oh,
She fell.
Yeah, she fell. Oh my gosh.
oh,
Yeah, and they can't get out because they hurt like the knee so bad.
oh, you are the man.
Yeah.
Lifesaver right there, man. Jeez. Yeah, like they say, perfect timing. At the right place at the right time.
That is crazy. Now, look, I don't know what that woman's circumstances are. Maybe she has a bad knee or a bad back or something. But to me, that all could have been prevented if she strength trained, even regardless of whatever her body weight is, even if she maintained her body weight where it is, if she was doing some sort of strength training, resistance training, doing lunges, doing level changes of any kind, squats, lunges, single leg hip hinges, anything of that nature, her ability to pop up would have been greatly improved. I mean, think about this. Put yourself in her shoes. Imagine you fall and you have your baby stroller just rolling out into traffic. How quickly would you be up? I mean, I would be up in the drop of a dime. And look, I'm not a big fan of fat shaming because I know it doesn't work, but I really am interested to know where this woman is today and whether or not this circumstance and it going viral made her improve her circumstances, if it motivated her to improve. Because to me, I would feel so much shame around this, the fact that I almost let my kid die because I was not capable enough to actually get up off the ground once I had fallen. Now, it's a touchy topic, I know, but that is a necessity. You know, if you are not able to protect your family, like physically, so then you're not fit. And it's just that simple, you know, and it's not that hard. I mean, in that other video with Greg Doucette and Zach Telander, he talks about how most people believe that attaining a healthy and fit body is too hard. And it's really not. I mean, it really does not require that much. You could lift weights and all the studies back this up, that you do not need that much. 2 weightlifting days a week, right? And those could be 45 minutes each, 2 cardio sessions a week, and just walk on your off days. Like, I'm sure you guys have heard of 10-minute walks. These are blowing up in popularity. Everyone's talking about doing 10-minute walks to not only just burn some extra calories, but improve your glycemic control. Right after a meal is a good time to do it. But that's really all it takes. You don't have to do what all these other fitness influencers are doing. And in fact, I would even go as far as to say is that's a bad place to start for most people. And that's probably why they quit a lot of the times, because it's just too much for them to sustain. They haven't built the foundational habits yet to have that much volume throughout the week. Not to mention, you start going ham like this. One of my friends who I've worked with, he is a server at a restaurant. Now, if you've done any serving work, you understand that you're on your feet for a very long time. The shifts can be extremely long. And so you need energy. You cannot be all like stiff and sore and stuff because you need to perform. And he talks about how weightlifting, weight training really wipes him out. That's a major concern for him. And I understand that because he's gone from a virtually no weightlifting background to, if he goes to lifting weights, he's incredibly sore. His energy levels are completely drained the next day. And so it is a big deal that people do not start doing too much too soon. You have to ease into it and start off with the short amount, 15 minutes before you do 45 minutes. Like, just build the habit to begin with. But if you can do 2 days of weight training, 2 days of cardio, and then just walking the rest of the time when you can, you will be, I promise you, if you can stay consistent with that, you'd probably have a top 10% physique in the country. And I'm telling you, that's how easy it is. It is so easy. It's really just consistency. I'm telling you. So let me jump off my soapbox. But one thing I did want to talk about is people in the gym doing a bunch of nonsense. So like, this is where people could be not making the progress they want to. And I just want to leave you with a few points just to build on what I was just talking about before I move on. But these are just like some points to help you succeed. They're very important points, but they're very simple. You know, like you hear about people trying to shock the muscle by switching up the workouts each time and all that stuff. And I'm telling you, that stuff just does not work. The research does not support that. Novelty is fun. Doing new things is fun. And if that helps to motivate you, to push you into the gym, okay, I'm good. I'm good with that, because adherence, ultimately at the end of the day, which adherence is like, are you actually going to follow through with the program? Adherence is the most important factor in success. This is why everyone says, stay consistent, stay consistent. So if new stuff and changing the program helps like them have fun and be engaged in their workout program, that's fantastic. But ultimately, what they should be doing is sticking to the same program for anywhere from 6 to 12 weeks or longer. I mean, I followed programs for half a year and just continued to make progress. And like, it, to me, it's a lot easier to do that, because leading into my next point, you have to write down your weights. So one of the key things in order to be successful with fitness is a concept called progressive overload. There are certain variables that you want to progressively increase. It could be the amount of weight that you're doing. It could be the number of reps you're doing. It could be decreasing the rest. You know, it's a concept that's so important that I would argue that without it, you won't make any progress at all. If you just stay, and that's what most happens to most people, they just stay at the same weight. They stay at the same reps. And I would say that those people are just exercising. They're not really training. And that's the difference. I would say try to get yourself into the mindset of training instead of exercise. Exercise is good, but if you really want to build a physique, you want to add a little bit of muscle, you want to get a little stronger, you have to progressively overload the muscle. So think about it. If you're constantly changing the exercises you're doing, you're constantly changing the program you're doing, you're not giving yourself an opportunity to progressively overload, because by the time you get back to an exercise, it's been 3 weeks or whatever. So I would say writing everything down. You could do it pen and paper. That's what I do. Some people like tracking apps. That's totally fine. Whatever helps you, just write it down. Track your workouts, track your weights, track the reps and sets that you're doing, and make sure you're doing just a little bit more each time. If you have time, this is a third point that I want to talk about for this. If you have time, don't do supersets. I do supersets at time. If you're not familiar with what supersets and compound sets are, it's where instead of doing a set of an exercise and then resting for 3 minutes or whatever, you do a set of an exercise, and then right after that, you jump into another set. It could be the same muscle group or it could be different muscle groups, but essentially there's very little rest there. And one of the problems you run into that is you will not have enough strength to elicit a strength adaptation for the next set, for that zero rest set. And so it's just not efficient. And I know a lot of people are doing it. This has been, I've even prescribed this to some of my clients before, just as a time-saving mechanism. But in the back of my mind, I know that it's not the most efficient way to do it. So the only time I would say is like, if you're incredibly short on time, or if you just don't like being in the gym or working out that long, it can be a useful tool to get a lot done in a short amount of time. I mean, that goes back to adherence. What is going to keep you in the gym? What is going to keep you going? If having a shorter workout is going to get you there, that to me is most important. But as long as you're doing it with the understanding that it's not going to, improve your outcomes very much. You can still get stronger, you can still build some muscle, but you won't be doing it at the pace that you would be if you were truly devoting a set to a single exercise, doing that exercise, resting for 3 minutes, doing that same exercise. Fourth point, eat 20 to 40 grams of protein with each meal and increase your fiber intake. Adding good stuff to your plate, to me, is more important than trying to take stuff away, specifically fiber. Fiber is very filling. And one of the biggest issues people have with trying to lose weight is snacking. I have very little urge to snack these days, very little. Now, obviously, I've been doing this for a really long time. And so part of that has just been I've gotten out of the habit of snacking. But a lot of it is when I eat, I make sure I'm full. And if I'm full, I don't want to snack. I'm still full an hour, 2 hours later. And then by that time, I know I have another meal coming up. So I just don't even bother. So that'll also give you an easier time staying within your caloric allotment. You know, if you're trying to be in a deficit, it'll help you stay in a deficit because you won't be snacking. But the 20 to 40 grams of protein each meal, that's pretty, you know, that depends on your body weight. If you're really light, 20 is fine. If you're heavier, if you're 180 pounds, 200 pounds, 40 grams each meal is a better number. I personally aim for 40 to 50 and I weigh about 183 pounds. But if you're doing that, you know, you're making sure you're not snacking because you got the fiber, and you make sure you're stimulating muscle protein synthesis because you got the protein. Those are two of the most important factors in this whole thing when it comes to nutrition. And then the last point, and I've already said it, and I'm going to say it again, and I'm going to say it in other podcasts, and I'm going to continue to say it until it gets through your head, but that is to stay consistent. Stay consistent. It's not about how long your workout is. It's not about how intense your workout is. You could have a really short 20-minute workout that you do 2 to 3 times a week. But if you do that every week for a year, you will make so much progress, it'll make your head spin. As long as you're doing what? Following progressive overload principles. That is the most important thing that it comes down to. So just stay consistent, guys. Whatever you're doing, you have to make the decision, what is the minimum amount that I will commit to that is so small that I would feel stupid saying I'm going to do it and then I don't do it. And if that's 5 minutes for you, that's where you start. I mean, Jordan Peterson talks about this a lot. The book Atomic Habits talks about this type of stuff. You have to break it down so small that you almost feel silly that you don't do it. And sometimes that can get in the way of some people as well, where they're like, well, it's so small. Is it actually doing something? And the answer is yes, it is doing something. It's building the habit. And the habit is the important part, right? So anyways, on to the next topic. I want to talk about resveratrol. So David Sinclair, who's been at the forefront of the longevity space for a really long time, he has been on all of the Who's Who podcasts talking about longevity and how there's all these compounds. I mean, there's a few different figures, but he's one of the bigger ones. And just talking about how there's all these compounds that are helping to extend human life and all this stuff. And firstly, I just want to say there is zero evidence that any of this stuff has been able to extend the life of any human beings. Any of the research that these people are talking about is in animal studies, or it's just theory. They have a theory that a compound does a specific thing, and so they correlate that to a longer lifespan. And that's not necessarily true. Just because you have a theory does not mean it leads to the outcome that you think it will. But so resveratrol is a compound that David Sinclair was famous for, where he had some scientific research that came out that had all kinds of good findings. But what resveratrol is it's a polyphenol, which is an antioxidant, and it's found in, I think, peanuts, blueberries, cranberries, but most notably wine. And this kind of is where the saying that a glass of wine a day is a good thing, that's where that comes from. That's what it's thought, at least. But the big thing to take home here is that, or the big thing that I took home here, there's a really interesting video that I saw, and I'll play it here in a moment. But David Sinclair was on Peter Attia's podcast. And when Peter asks him why other scientists haven't been able to replicate his result, he straight up lies and says that he wasn't consulted during those trials. So basically, if you're not familiar with how trials go, it's a pretty basic process. If you conduct a study and you get a specific result, it gets peer reviewed, and then people want to try and replicate that to make sure that the findings are consistent. And if they can't, then either they perform the study wrong or your finding was false. And oftentimes people will try multiple times to replicate studies. And so they weren't able to replicate his study, and he lies and says he wasn't consulted, when in fact he was consulted. And in fact, his name was actually on the scientific paper, which that's a big deal. That's not just something that you forget about, like if you're consulted and your name ends up on a paper, that's a big deal, a huge deal. So I'm going to play the video and then we'll get into it.
Let's finish this resveratrol debacle so that if you are considering whether or not to take resveratrol supplements, you have more information to make your decision. GSK threw everything they could think of to try and make the sirtuin and resveratrol theories work. Since they were using micronized resveratrol, like the supplement companies today sell, absorption wasn't the issue. They tested micronized resveratrol in multiple myeloma patients, but unfortunately that trial was terminated early due to severe side effects, including toxicity to the kidneys, and the micronized resveratrol research was discontinued. Instead, GSK designed specific molecules that do activate the sirtuin-1 enzyme, but in the clinical trials, those sirtuin-1 activators had no effects. So in 2013, GSK decided to shut the door on Sertris Pharmaceuticals and closed everything down.
Wow. So what he's talking about there is that they halted the development of SRT-501, which was like a experimental version of resveratrol, because during the clinical trials involving multiple myeloma patients, the participants experienced kidney failure, kidney complications, whatever you want to call it. And some people have attributed that to dehydration, that, resveratrol can cause dehydration. And okay, either way, if that's true, it's still important to point that out because resveratrol is very popular right now. A lot of people are talking about it. It's sold virtually everywhere. There's all kinds of different kinds of it. And this kind of leads me into a kind of a supplement rant that I want to go on because I've been noticing a trend. So I kind of want to make a public service announcement about creatine. And it has to do with this, that everyone should do their own research, regardless of what any YouTuber says to you or even your doctor. If your doctor recommends a supplement, the supplement world is the wild, wild west. And this is a perfect example of it. Resveratrol, a scientist found had some findings that said it was good. They tried to replicate it. They couldn't. The company that tried to replicate it closed their doors. And found kidney complications during the trial, which that's a huge deal. But so creatine, I've been noticing a trend, a couple things. People have been asking me more about creatine. And then the other thing is I've been finding creatine in some of my clients' houses. And I'm like, are you taking creatine? And they're like, oh, well, sort of. I take it here and there. Or they'll say, I tried it and then I stopped it. And let me just be abundantly clear here. So what is creatine? So you have your phosphocreatine system in your body. You've likely heard that your body uses ATP for energy. This is called, it stands for adenosine triphosphate. So during that process of using ATP for energy, it cleaves off one of those phosphate groups. So there's triphosphate. That means there's three. You use the ATP, it cleaves off, and it makes it adenosine diphosphate. Creatine has a phosphate group. So if you take more creatine, the creatine gives its phosphate group to the adenosine diphosphate, which turns it from di to tri again. So now you have more energy reserve. So in a nutshell, that's essentially what creatine does. It provides another phosphate group for your body to continually produce adenosine triphosphate. Now, when it does that, a couple of side effects can happen. So creatine is extremely dehydrating as well. Well, that's not technically true. So you do have to increase, what creatine does is it hydrates your muscles with water. And so the biggest thing that people have to watch out for is they have to increase their water intake, but they also have to increase their electrolytes. So electrolyte balance is a very important thing. And I'll tell you a story. When I first started taking creatine, this was a long, long time ago, I was not aware just how important electrolytes were to take along with creatine, specifically potassium. And so I'm taking creatine, I upped my water intake, but I didn't up my electrolyte intake. And while I was sleeping, I had a severe muscle cramp in my hamstring. And when I say severe, it was so bad that it dislocated my right knee out of a dead sleep. So that's a big deal, and that can happen to anyone. Cramping is like probably the number one cited side effect of creatine. But why I think this is important is because there's been more research coming out saying that creatine is a nootropic. And a nootropic is basically a cognition enhancer. It helps with your memory, helps with your focus and all that stuff. And I do think that that's great that research is coming out. And I think they need to do more research. And I think with time, they'll find more stuff that creatine ends up doing. I think it's just such a great compound. But it is risky. I think leaving the nootropic aside, it's important to recognize that creatine is for muscle and strength, first and foremost. So if you're not working out, you shouldn't just be taking creatine on the side for cognitive benefits. Ultimately, it is going to improve your strength. That's why you should be taking it. And then the other thing is you shouldn't just be dipping your toe in and taking it kind of intermittently here and there. I'll take it once this week, I'll take it 2 times that week, because there is a saturation period. And, the saturation period depends on how much you're taking during that period. There are people out there that say you take 20 grams a day for a week, and that's a good saturation period. There are people that say you don't need to saturate. The saturation period will take a little bit longer if you just do five grams a day, but ultimately it's not such a big deal. But if you stop taking it, you do become unsaturated. And so it's important that if you are going to take it, you take it every day. It's not just something that you take when you're feeling weak or whatever. So that's kind of leading in the resveratrol thing. Do your research on these supplements. Don't just take them, and do a lot of research. Like, actually sit down and spend some time and read, how are you supposed to use it? How much are you supposed to be using? Like, why are you using it? What exactly is it doing to your body? And yeah, there are some great supplements out there. I think creatine is probably in the top 3. I would say caffeine is up there. And honestly, protein powder, whey protein is one of the best supplements that you could take. And there are people that will say, like, oh, you shouldn't be taking whey protein powder. It's processed, this, that, and a third. I do think there are other whey protein powders that are better than others, or there are some that are better than others. Like, I personally use Jocko Mulk. His whey protein is amazing. It tastes really good, and it's made with monk fruit as opposed to sucralose. I was talking about sucralose before, and it's in everything. And hopefully, since I've been talking about that, you guys have been taking a look at the back of the ingredients of your foods and noticing that it is, in fact, in everything. But I want to tell you about a useful tool. So Australia has a really useful guide. It's Australian Institute of Sport has a supplement guide. It's www.ais.gov.au/nutrition/supplements. And they use a ABCD system where each letter corresponds with a certain level of evidence. So A would mean that there is a lot of evidence, like clearly this thing works and we recommend it to our athletes. And then going down the line, down to D, it starts to get into, there is no evidence for this, or, there's a little bit of evidence, but we need more evidence, and then it goes down to like banned substances as well. So if you're ever questioning, like, what is this supplement? What does it do? Should I be taking this? Yes. Like, does it actually work? Use that resource, because they also, within that resource, they cite some of the studies that they're basing their decision off of. So you can then, instead of having a Google search and find the stuff on your own, it's all right there for you. Anyway, so moving on, there's a Washington Post story that I want to talk about, and it's called, "Are Standing Desks Actually Healthy?" Here's what a new study says. A large new study of more than 83,000 adults found that standing for more than 2 hours a day, as many people with standing desks do, me right now, didn't protect against the cardiovascular risks of too much sitting. So firstly, I don't think that it's ever been said that a standing desk would reduce your cardiovascular disease risk. For me, when I think of a standing desk, it's structural integrity. So sitting down, to me, is essentially, there's a concept called motor programming. And if you've been following me for a while, you've probably heard me talk ad nauseum about this, but your body has motor units all around it, and those motor units control muscle contractions. And if you have a good motor program, then you have what I like to call structural integrity. Your body has a good map. Again, that's something your nervous system has a map of how you move. And if you provide motor programming that has to do with sitting, then you're not going to have good structural integrity. Your body will tighten up certain muscles will get weak, because essentially your map is sitting. Your body's trying to make you as efficient at sitting as possible. So it's like basically trying to get you better at predicting what's going to happen next in a lot of ways. And so cardiovascular disease isn't dependent on position, but to me, it's based off of movement. So there's like concepts like sedimentation, where you can have waste products build up in your body. For example, your lymphatic system, that's like your waste management system in a lot of ways. That system does not have a heart. It does not have like your circulatory system has a heart. Your lymphatic system does not, and they mirror each other. They look very similar. Like if you could see the human body and it's all of its structures, the muscle and all the nerves and the veins and all that stuff, your lymphatic system looks really, really close to your circulatory system, but it doesn't have a heart. So the heart pumps blood, right? It doesn't need movement. Your lymphatic system requires movement. The only other way is hot and cold cycles. So when you're hot, your fluids and stuff move out to the peripherals, your digits and all that stuff. And when you're cold, everything moves into the center of the body. And that's just how it is. And when you work out, when you exercise, your muscles essentially become pumps, and they pump old stuff away from where it was. Like say you have a sprained ankle and it's swollen. If you keep moving, you're going to pump that old pus and stuff away, and then it'll send new stuff there to help it heal. So movement is very important. So to me, it's being sedentary. So to their point, like me standing here right now, I'm standing for a really long time. Technically, I'm sedentary, right? I'm not actually doing anything, but that is what I would say would be more important. The standing desk point to me is like, I don't understand why these people try to make these points, because clearly standing is better than sitting for your body when it comes to, again, structural integrity. My legs are working right now. My glutes, I can feel them as I'm standing here. My glutes are turned on. My hamstrings are turned on. My muscles are working. Whereas if I'm just sitting in a desk, my body's just kind of sitting there. It's just relaxed. It's not really doing anything, especially like if I'm leaning forward on my elbows on the desk and my legs aren't having to do anything. So it's I understand the result, but I just don't understand the intention of it. You know what I mean? Like it's almost like, so what is the outcome here? Are you trying to get people to stop using standing desks? Cause that's a silly concept. It really is. So the next story is a CBS News story that I want to talk about. Wearing wrist weights during walks is a trendy hack for toned arms. Here's what to know about safety. And basically they talk about, people have been using this, but they've been running into issues with strains and whatnot. They go on to say, but as the combo has come into the spotlight, other users have warned that they've developed issues like tendonitis from strapping on the weighted wristbands. And I think this is a silly story, and I think it highlights the meme, or, I've joked about it before, but how women will do anything to avoid doing a traditional style workout. So firstly, I could go on to say that there is no such thing as tone. And, there are groups of people out there that would say that. And I have certainly said that in the past, but I think I've sort of changed my stance on this a little bit, where let's imagine that I grow my bicep. If I make my bicep bigger and then I reduce my body fat percentage, would you classify that as I have toned my arm? Because technically I did, right? I changed how it looks. I changed the muscle tone of it. Now, truly what the, academic definition of muscle tone is basically the level of contraction. So if I like really squeeze my bicep right now, I have a high level of muscle tone. It's referring to autonomic nervous system tone. And if I sort of contract it, I have a low level of muscle tone. So that's specifically what muscle tone is, but leave that to the side. I stopped even saying that to people because it's just not useful. But like when people say they want to get toned arms, they go on to do stuff like this, where they'll grab like mini dumbbells and they'll be out there walking and swinging their arms and stuff, or they'll use wrist weights and whatever to try and achieve the same result. And this is where I think it's extremely important to go back to the earlier point of progressive overload and not doing random things. If you truly want to tone your arms, then you should be doing bicep curls and tricep extensions, right? And you should be writing that stuff down. So how much weight did you do? How many reps did you do? And how many days in the week did you do it? And then each time you do it, try to increase it just by a little bit. Add 1 rep or add 2.5 pounds, whatever that may be, And by doing that, you will increase the size of your biceps or your triceps. And then if you're doing all the other stuff, like taking your walks, doing your cardio, you reduce your body fat, and now you have officially toned your arms. So I would just encourage people, when possible, as much as possible, to try and avoid trends like this, because it can be fun. Going back to my earlier point, if it helps you get there and it helps you adhere to your program of just exercising in the first place, okay, do what you got to do to make it enjoyable for you so that you keep showing up. But ultimately, again, you will not make the same results as if you had been doing, following progressive overload principles and doing the same thing week in, week out for at least 6 weeks. I would say even longer, just like I did earlier. There are too many trends out there, and I think it's really important that people stick to a program and progressively overload. But that's it for me. I appreciate you if you're still here and you're listening. I had a couple complications in there. I had to cut out. It looked like my internet went out, but we made it through 43 minutes. I appreciate everyone that's here, and I appreciate everyone that leaves a like and comments. And like I said, give me some feedback, review the podcast on Spotify, like leave a comment, let me know what your thoughts are. If you don't think it's a 5-star podcast, then don't make it a 5-star podcast. But share it around with your friends, to anyone that you think might benefit from this type of information. And it's still evolving. I'm still not 100% sure where exactly that, like, what the structure is going to be, but I am enjoying sort of like the story structure and just giving my thoughts on it, and talking about studies and stuff when they do pop across my desk, and giving my thoughts on that. But once again, you can follow me at Always Adaptive on Instagram, TikTok, X, and Threads. My website is alwaysadaptive.com. And if you have any questions, you want further elaboration on anything, you can email me at randall@alwaysadaptive.com. I'll see you at the next one.